Abdul and Amina's marriage was a picture of bliss. Abdul, in his early 30s, had a charm that could light up any room. His smile was magnetic, his affection for Amina unyielding. Amina, glowing with the promise of motherhood, couldn't imagine a life without him. The couple lived in a modest, cozy home in the heart of their small town, surrounded by friends and family who admired their seemingly perfect relationship. Abdul showered Amina with flowers, gifts, and kind words, making sure she was comfortable during her pregnancy. He would hold her hand while they sat together in the evenings, whispering sweet promises about their future, their growing family. He doted on her in every possible way, often telling her how lucky he was to have her as his wife. But beneath this facade of perfection, Abdul had a secret. For the past 5 years, throughout their marriage, he had been unfaithful. With Miriam, Linda, Titi, and Halima, women who he had met by chance and kept around as his side affairs, he had lied and manipulated, spinning a web of deceit that he thought would never be uncovered. Amina, however, remained blissfully unaware, focused solely on their child and the life they were building together. She had no reason to suspect that her world would soon unravel. Amina's first clinic checkup after her pregnancy announcement was routine, but it changed the course of her life. There, in the waiting room, she met 4 other women, Miriam, Linda, Titi, and Halima, each at different stages of their pregnancies. Despite their differences in age, background, and temperament, they quickly formed a bond. They became inseparable, sharing their hopes, fears, and the small joys that came with carrying life. It was a friendship born out of shared experience, a sisterhood that Amina hadn't anticipated. They would talk for hours about everything from pregnancy cravings to the challenges of relationships, always offering support and advice. One day, during one of their late-night chats, the topic of relationships came up. Amina, in her usual open manner, shared stories of Abdul, speaking of his devotion to her and his excitement for the baby. The others listened quietly, but one by one, they began to share their own stories. Miriam's husband, Tommy, had been distant lately. Linda's partner, Daniel, seemed overly possessive. Titi's fiancé, Chuka, was rarely around, and Halima's husband, Babajid, seemed uninterested in her pregnancy. It was strange. None of the women seemed to have the perfect relationship they thought they would have at this stage of their lives. But Amina never suspected anything more. She believed her own marriage was as secure as ever. Little did she know that her new friends shared a deeper connection than just their pregnancies. As Amina's pregnancy progressed, Abdul remained as loving and attentive as ever. He continued to spoil her, taking her to dinner, making sure she had everything she needed. He promised to be the best father, to support her through every step of motherhood. But in secret, he continued to juggle his affairs. Miriam, Linda, Titi, and Halima, though all unaware of each other's connections to Abdul, began to notice patterns in their own relationships. It became more and more clear that the men they had trusted were not as faithful as they seemed. They confided in each other more often, comparing their struggles, and in time, the subject of Abdul began to surface. One evening, Amina texted the group, asking if they could all meet for coffee. She had just caught a glimpse of Abdul's phone screen while he was in the shower and noticed a name she didn't recognize, Sophie. Amina's heart began to race. It was just a name, but the nagging feeling in the back of her mind refused to be ignored. She wanted to trust Abdul. He had always been so good to her. But the image of that name lingered in her thoughts, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That evening, when Abdul came home, she couldn't help but ask about Sophie. Abdul, ever the smooth talker, laughed it off. Sophie? Oh, just a colleague from work. Nothing to worry about, babe. Amina, still unsure but desperate to believe him, let the conversation go. But in the days that followed, she became more vigilant, her heart growing heavy with doubt. Was she imagining things, or was there a deeper truth hidden beneath the surface? The women continued their growing bond, meeting regularly to share stories, advice, and updates on their pregnancies. Amina's joy was now mingled with suspicion, though she never shared her fears with her friends. She couldn't bring herself to question Abdul. He had been everything she wanted in a husband, the man she had always dreamed of. Meanwhile, Abdul continued his secretive behavior. He would disappear for hours, citing work commitments or late-night meetings. Amina, despite her unease, believed in him. He had to be telling the truth. But even her closest friends began to notice her growing distance. Miriam pulled Amina aside one afternoon, gently asking if everything was okay with her marriage. Amina hesitated. She didn't want to burden her friends with doubts about Abdul. She didn't want to see their pitying looks, nor did she want to admit that her perfect life wasn't so perfect after all. Then, one fateful day, everything changed. The women went into labor, one by one, each of them heading to the hospital at nearly the same time. Amina's contractions began early in the morning, and Abdul rushed her to the hospital, his face filled with excitement. He called his family, making sure everyone knew the big day had come. However, as Amina was being settled into her room, Abdul went to check on the other women. He knew some of them were in the same hospital, but he was unprepared for the shock of his life. As he passed by a nurse's station, he caught a glimpse of Titi's name on the door. He froze. Then, as he made his way down the hall, he passed Miriam and Linda, both in rooms that were only a few doors apart. His heart began to pound as the reality of the situation settled in. What were these women doing here? All of them. The truth was about to unravel, and Abdul was not prepared for the consequences. As the women's labor progressed, tensions rose. Miriam, Linda, Titi, and Halima began talking amongst themselves, growing more and more suspicious as they shared their experiences of Abdul. It didn't take long for them to piece things together. Their stories mirrored each other too closely. Each woman had experienced moments where Abdul had been distant, or had made excuses for not being around. Abdul, once confident and composed, now found himself scrambling. The women were catching on to the truth, and he was cornered. When Amina was moved into the delivery room, he rushed to her side, trying to focus on the birth of their child. But in the back of his mind, all he could hear were the angry whispers of the women in the hall. The women confronted Abdul, each one expressing their heartbreak, their anger, and their betrayal. They all demanded answers, each of them accusing him of lying, of deceiving them. Abdul tried to defend himself, but his words faltered. He couldn't explain how his lies had grown so big, or how he had allowed himself to hurt so many people. As Amina labored in another room, unaware of the confrontation, Abdul's world began to crumble. The perfect image he had built, the illusion of a happy marriage, was now shattered beyond repair. Amina's screams echoed through the halls of the hospital, signaling the arrival of their child. But as Abdul rushed to her side, the weight of his guilt became unbearable. How could he face her after everything he had done? What would happen when she found out the truth? His once perfect life was now an intricate web of lies, and he knew there was no way to undo the damage. The chapter ends with Abdul, standing in the doorway of the delivery room, contemplating his future, unsure of whether Amina would ever forgive him, and unsure if he could even forgive himself. Amina, exhausted from the long hours of labor, finally delivered a healthy baby boy. As she held him in her arms, all the pain of the past months seemed to fade into the background. The joy of motherhood consumed her, filling her with a love so fierce that it was almost overwhelming. But the joy didn't last long. As the nurses came in and out of her room, she noticed Abdul's absence. He hadn't been by her side during the delivery like he promised. She tried not to think too much of it. After all, he had been busy with work, hadn't he? But as her body began to settle into the recovery room, her thoughts kept drifting to the confrontation in the hallway. The whispers of the women, the angry looks, they had been so pointed. Something was terribly wrong. She needed answers. Amina called for Abdul, her heart racing. When he walked in, his face was pale, his eyes avoiding hers. "Where have you been?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Why weren't you here with me?" Abdul hesitated, his mouth dry. He had no answers that would make this right. I had to take care of some things, Amina," he stammered, his gaze shifting nervously to the baby in her arms. "But I'm here now. We're a family now." But Amina could feel the weight of the unspoken words hanging between them. She smiled weakly, unsure of how to handle the moment. As her baby boy gurgled in her arms, the reality of what Abdul had done loomed large, and she knew this moment, this lie, was not one she could ignore. As the hours passed in the hospital, Amina's mind raced. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She had been so wrapped up in her joy of becoming a mother, she hadn't stopped to really see the cracks in her marriage. But now, with the truth starting to surface, the facade of Abdul's devotion was beginning to crumble. By evening, when the visiting hours were over, Amina was alone in the room, the soft hum of hospital equipment the only sound breaking the silence. She felt the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. Her thoughts wandered back to the earlier moments when she overheard the confrontation between Abdul and the other women. What had happened? What did they say? Was it really true? She sat up in bed, cradling her son close, needing clarity. The doors opened slowly, and Abdul entered, his face now a mask of concern. "Amina, I think we need to talk," he said softly, though his voice trembled. She looked up at him, her heart thudding painfully in her chest. "Talk about what, Abdul?" she replied, her voice steady but cold. "What is there left to talk about?" Abdul hesitated. "Amina, there's something I need to tell you. It's not easy, but you deserve to know the truth." Her heart skipped a beat. This was it. The truth. But Amina was not ready. She had spent years building her life on trust, and in an instant, it could all come crashing down. She didn't want to hear it, not yet. "I don't want to hear it, Abdul," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "You've lied to me for so long. I don't know if I can trust you anymore." Abdul stood motionless, his guilt tearing at him. He wanted to take her hand, to promise her that things would be different. But the weight of his betrayal was too much. "I'm sorry, Amina. I know I've hurt you." But Amina's heart had already closed off. "You didn't just hurt me, Abdul," she whispered. "You hurt us. Our baby. And I can't forgive that." The following day, the truth came crashing down on Abdul in the worst possible way. One by one, the women, Mariam, Linda, Titi, and Halima, arrived at the hospital to see Amina. Abdul had tried to avoid them, but he couldn't escape the storm that was now approaching. Amina, now fully aware of the situation, had made arrangements to meet with the other women. They needed to confront him together. She wanted answers. She needed to understand how he could do this to her, how he could betray her and father their child while juggling multiple affairs behind her back. As the women gathered in Amina's room, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Amina sat on the edge of her bed, her baby wrapped in a soft blanket beside her. The other women stood in front of her, each of them holding their own stories of betrayal and heartache. "How could you, Abdul?" Miriam's voice trembled with anger. "How could you lie to all of us like this?" Titi's eyes were filled with tears. "You promised me the world, Abdul. You said you loved me. And now look where we are." Abdul, standing in the corner, couldn't bring himself to meet their eyes. He felt small, insignificant, a shadow of the man he once was. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he murmured, his voice breaking. "I didn't want to hurt anyone." Halima stepped forward, her face a mix of sorrow and rage. "Then why did you do it? Why did you keep coming back, pretending everything was fine, while we were all here, believing you were our partner? Were we just a game to you?" The questions came like an avalanche, each one more pointed than the last. Abdul's defenses crumbled under the weight of their words. He had nothing left to say. Nothing could excuse the pain he had caused. Amina, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. Her voice was steady, but cold as ice. "You lied to me, Abdul. You lied to all of us. And now, I can't look at you the same way. Not after what you've done. Not after everything you've taken from us." As the confrontation ended, the room grew quiet. The women, though hurt, found solace in their shared pain, each of them slowly realizing they weren't alone in this heartbreak. They didn't have to carry the weight of their betrayal in silence. Amina, however, was left with a decision that would shape her future. She turned to Abdul, her eyes filled with a sadness that cut deeper than any words could express. "I don't know if I can stay with you, Abdul. I don't know if I can ever forgive you. I have to think about what's best for me and my son." Abdul, looking at her with desperation in his eyes, reached out for her hand. "Amina, please. I'm so sorry. Please don't leave me." But Amina pulled her hand away. "I need space, Abdul. I need to figure out who I am without you. And you need to understand that my love for you doesn't erase the pain you've caused." With that, she turned her back on him, and for the first time in years, Abdul stood there, truly alone. In the days that followed, Amina took time for herself. She spent hours with her son, marveling at the tiny life she had brought into the world. She surrounded herself with her friends, the other women who understood her pain, who had been through the same betrayal, and who helped her find the strength to heal. Abdul, meanwhile, sought out therapy. He had never truly understood why he cheated, why he had destroyed his life and the lives of those around him. He knew it was too late to win back Amina's trust, but he vowed to change. He knew that, no matter what, he needed to become a better man, for himself and for his child. Amina knew that healing wasn't a straight path. There would be days when the memories of Abdul's betrayal would threaten to overwhelm her. But she also knew that she was stronger than she had ever given herself credit for. She had a son to raise, and no matter what had happened in her past, she would move forward, one step at a time. The story doesn't end with Amina's decision or Abdul's attempts at redemption. It's a story of resilience, of finding strength in the aftermath of betrayal, and of choosing to forgive, both others and oneself, in order to move on. In the weeks following the hospital confrontation, Amina began to find solace in her own strength. Despite the heartbreak she had endured, there was something deeply empowering about standing up for herself, about refusing to let Abdul's mistakes define her. She found herself growing closer to her son, realizing that he was her anchor, the reason she had to be strong and move forward. Amina decided to return to work part-time, needing a break from the constant reminders of the betrayal that lingered in her home. She focused on rebuilding her life, no longer relying on Abdul's presence to feel complete. It wasn't easy. There were days when she felt the weight of her decision pressing heavily on her heart, days when she questioned whether she was doing the right thing. But with every step forward, she felt a little more at peace with her choice. She started to lean on her new circle of friends, the women who had been through their own pain and who, despite everything, had become a source of support and understanding. Together, they forged a bond stronger than the ones they had with the men in their lives, a sisterhood born out of shared experiences. They would meet regularly, offering advice on motherhood, sharing their struggles with relationships, and encouraging each other to stay strong. While Amina was reclaiming her life, Abdul found himself caught in a downward spiral. His affair with Mariam had ended in bitter anger, and Linda had refused to even look at him after the confrontation in the hospital. Titi had already moved on, and Halima, though still heartbroken, made it clear that she would no longer tolerate his lies. Abdul had always been good at evading the consequences of his actions, but now there was nowhere to hide. He had lost the love of his wife, the trust of the women he had once been involved with, and his own self-respect. He knew he had to change, but the question was, could he? Was it too late to repair the damage he had done? He began attending therapy, trying to understand the reasons behind his infidelity. The therapist, a calm and thoughtful woman, helped him explore the deep-seated issues of self-worth and insecurity that had plagued him for years. Abdul had always been a man who sought validation from others, and the affair had become a way to feel desirable, to feel powerful. But now, he saw the destruction he had caused, and the guilt weighed on him like a ton of bricks. Amina had made it clear that she needed space, but as time passed, she began to question whether she was making the right choice in distancing herself from Abdul completely. The idea of forgiveness lingered in her thoughts, but the pain of his betrayal remained fresh in her mind. Could she ever trust him again? Was she strong enough to put the pieces of her heart back together? One evening, after a long day at work, Amina sat down with a cup of tea, her son peacefully asleep in the other room. Her thoughts wandered back to Abdul. She hadn't seen him in weeks, and though part of her wanted to see him, to hear him apologize properly, another part of her feared what it would mean for her to let him back in. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Abdul. Amina, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I've been working on myself. I understand the pain I've caused, and I'm committed to becoming a better man. For you, for me, and for our son. Please, just give me a chance to prove it. The words pierced through her heart. Part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that he could change. But she wasn't sure if she could ever trust him again. She sat there for a long time, her thoughts a whirlwind, before finally typing a reply. I need more time, Abdul. I'm not sure what the future holds, but right now, I need to focus on me and my son. Please respect that. She sent the message and sat back, breathing deeply. The weight of the decision felt heavy, but she knew it was the right choice for now. As Amina continued to find her own path, she became more involved in the community. She joined a local mothers group where she could share experiences and learn from others who had faced challenges of their own. It was here that she met other women who had overcome their own struggles, who had faced heartbreak and betrayal, but had emerged stronger for it. One evening, after a particularly moving session on self-healing, Amina found herself talking with an older woman named Esther. Esther had raised her children on her own after a painful divorce and had rebuilt her life from the ground up. She shared her wisdom with Amina, telling her that true healing didn't come from clinging to the past, but from embracing the future with open arms. "You are stronger than you realize, my dear," Esther said, her voice warm. "Your worth is not tied to what others have done to you. It's time to start living for you and your son." Amina left the group that evening feeling lighter, more determined than ever to reclaim her life. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face the challenges ahead. With the support of her new friends and her son as her guiding light, she felt a renewed sense of hope. Meanwhile, Abdul continued his journey of self-reflection and change. He had hit rock bottom, and it was there that he realized how much he had taken for granted. He started taking small steps to prove that he was serious about becoming a better man. He began volunteering at local charities, helping in community outreach programs, and slowly, people started to see the man he was becoming, not the one he had been. Still, he struggled with guilt and regret. He thought of Amina every day, but he respected her decision to take space. He knew that trust, once broken, was not easily repaired, but he was committed to showing her that he was capable of growth. Abdul sent her another message a week later. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Amina, but I want you to know that I am working on being a better person, not just for myself, but for you and our son. When you're ready, I hope we can talk." He didn't know when that day would come, or if it ever would, but he was willing to wait. Amina's journey was far from over, but she had made incredible strides in the months since the hospital confrontation. With every passing day, she felt more like herself again. She focused on her career, her friendships, and most importantly, her son. She had become a force to be reckoned with, a woman who knew her worth, who understood the importance of self-love and self-care. One day, as she walked through the park with her son in a stroller, she saw Abdul across the street. He was helping an elderly woman across the road, smiling gently as he did so. There was something different about him now, something genuine. For a moment, Amina stopped, watching him from afar. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt no anger toward him. There was no hatred, only a quiet understanding of the man he had been and the man he was trying to become. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a step forward. As the months passed, Amina continued to focus on herself and her son. She had moments of doubt, moments where the pain of Abdul's betrayal resurfaced, but she no longer let it control her. She had a future to build, and she would do so on her own terms. One day, after several months of no communication, Amina received a call from Abdul. He asked if they could meet, if she would give him the chance to explain himself, really explain what had happened and why he had made the choices he did. Amina felt a surge of emotion, but she agreed. She wasn't sure what to expect from this meeting, but she knew that, for her own peace of mind, it was time to face the past head-on. The day of the meeting arrived, and Amina felt an unexpected nervousness stir within her. She had spent months focusing on her own healing, and now, here was Abdul, still a part of her past, but not someone she was ready to fully let back in. But she owed it to herself to listen, to hear him out. After all, they shared a history, and if nothing else, she deserved the truth. Amina agreed to meet him at a cafe halfway between their homes. She arrived early, sitting by the window with her thoughts swirling. It had been so long since she'd seen him, and although the years hadn't erased the pain, she was determined not to let it control her. When Abdul walked in, Amina's heart fluttered for a moment. He looked different, more mature, more worn. He was dressed simply, his usual confidence replaced by an aura of humility. As he sat down across from her, his eyes avoided hers for a moment, and Amina felt a mix of frustration and sympathy. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Abdul said, his voice softer than she remembered. Amina nodded, taking a sip of her drink. "I wasn't sure if I would, but I think I owe it to myself to hear you out." Abdul met her gaze, his eyes filled with regret. "I know I hurt you, Amina. I've hurt everyone I've ever loved. But I want you to know that I am not the same man I was. I've spent months working on myself, on understanding why I did what I did." Amina studied him for a long moment. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, but could she trust it? Could she trust him again after everything? "You were never the man I thought you were, Abdul," Amina said quietly. "You made promises, and you broke them. I was left picking up the pieces of my heart, all while trying to hold our family together. And it wasn't just me who suffered. You hurt our son too, whether you meant to or not. Abdul winced at the mention of their son, and for a moment, his gaze dropped to the table. I know. And I am sorry. I've been trying to do the hard work of understanding why I sabotaged everything that was good in my life. The lies, the cheating, they were all a way for me to hide from myself. But now I see the destruction I caused, and I want to be better. For him. For you. For myself. Amina sat back in her chair, absorbing his words. She wanted to believe him, but years of lies and betrayal couldn't be undone with a few sentences. And you think that's enough? Saying you're sorry? That it just fixes everything? No, Abdul shook his head, his voice filled with emotion. I don't expect that. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or ever, for that matter. I've lost your trust. I can't undo the past, but I can show you that I am serious about changing. I want to rebuild what I've broken, even if it takes a lifetime. Amina took a deep breath. She had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure what to do with it. The truth was, the pain was still there, lingering just beneath the surface. She had moved on, built a life without him. But part of her, the part that once loved him deeply, wondered if there could ever be a place for him in her world again. I don't know, Abdul, she said softly, her voice betraying a hint of vulnerability. I've worked so hard to heal, to move forward. I'm afraid if I let you back in, it will break me all over again. I don't want that. Abdul leaned forward, his eyes pleading. I understand that. I'm not asking for anything right now, Amina. I just want the chance to show you that I've changed. That I can be the man you deserve, one who will be there for you, for our son, without fail. There was a long silence between them. Amina's heart ached as memories of their life together flooded back, both the beautiful and the painful moments. But she wasn't the same woman who had married him. She was stronger now, more certain of who she was and what she needed. I need time, Amina finally said. I'm not sure what this all means, or if it even means anything. But I'm not closing the door completely. I just need to figure out what's right for me. Abdul nodded, his expression both hopeful and resigned. I understand. I'll be here whenever you're ready, Amina. In the weeks following their meeting, Amina focused even more on her own growth. She didn't rush to make any decisions about Abdul, but she allowed herself to entertain the idea of forgiveness. She didn't know if she could fully forgive him for everything he had done, but she was learning that forgiveness wasn't about absolving the other person. It was about freeing herself from the burden of resentment. Amina spent more time with her friends, especially the other mothers. Together, they celebrated each small victory in their lives, whether it was a milestone in their children's development, a new job, or just a moment of peace after a long day. They reminded her that she was not alone, that she was strong, and that she deserved happiness. Abdul, for his part, continued his path of self-improvement. He took up a new hobby, started attending support groups, and dedicated himself to being a better man. He knew that no matter what happened with Amina, he could never undo his mistakes. But he could control the man he chose to become moving forward. One afternoon, while Amina was out for a walk with her son, she unexpectedly ran into Abdul. It had been months since they last saw each other in person, and she had spent that time working on herself. Seeing him now, though, felt different. He wasn't the man who had betrayed her. He was someone who had grown, who had changed. Hi, Amina, Abdul said cautiously, a small smile on his face. I didn't expect to see you here. Amina nodded, her son babbling happily in her stroller. I didn't expect to see you either. There was a brief, awkward silence before Abdul spoke again. I've been thinking about what you said. About needing time. I'm not rushing you, but I wanted to check in. How are you doing? Amina paused, looking down at her son for a moment before meeting his eyes. I'm doing well, she said honestly. It hasn't been easy, but I'm okay. And I'm starting to see that I don't need to hold on to the past to move forward. Abdul's eyes softened as he listened to her. I'm glad to hear that. I hope one day you can find it in your heart to trust me again. Amina's heart wavered, but she held her ground. I can't promise that, Abdul. Not now. But maybe in time, we can find a way to coexist peacefully, for the sake of our son. Abdul nodded, understanding. He wasn't asking for more right now. He had come to terms with the reality of his actions and their consequences. But he was willing to wait, to do the work, to prove that he could be a better man. As they parted ways, Amina felt a sense of peace settle within her. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. She was in control of her own happiness now. And that was enough. As time went on, Amina continued to find balance between her new life as a mother and her journey towards self-discovery. She had made peace with the past, but the future was still unwritten. Whether that future would include Abdul or not remained to be seen. She had learned that the love for her son was the most important thing in her life. Every day, as she watched him grow and develop, Amina knew that she was giving him everything she could: love, stability, and the courage to face whatever challenges life would throw his way. Abdul, for his part, had made great strides in his personal growth. He remained a part of their son's life, but their relationship was still distant. They were both learning to coexist, to raise their child in a way that was healthy and supportive. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And so, life went on, with all its twists and turns. Amina didn't have all the answers, but she was confident that, no matter what, she would be okay. She had learned to stand on her own, and that, in itself, was a victory. The story of Amina and Abdul is far from over. They have both been through so much, but the path forward is theirs to choose. They have the power to create the future they deserve, whether it's together or apart. Months passed, and Amina's life began to find a new rhythm. She grew more confident in her role as a mother, more at peace with the person she had become. Her career flourished, and though the pain of her past still lingered, she no longer felt consumed by it. One day, while at the park with her son, Amina spotted Abdul across the way. He was playing with their son, teaching him how to kick a ball, his face lit up with pride. The sight of him with their child stirred something in her, a deep, inexplicable ache. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was something. Something that reminded her of the man she had married, of the man who had once made her laugh, who had once made her feel like the most important person in the world. For a brief moment, Amina found herself wondering, could we find our way back? As if sensing her gaze, Abdul turned and met her eyes. He smiled awkwardly, but there was warmth there, a recognition of the shared history between them. "Hey, Amina," he called, waving as he approached. Amina's heart skipped a beat. She had grown so used to the distance between them, to the separation of their lives. Seeing him now, without the walls that had separated them for so long, felt jarring. "Hi, Abdul," she said, her voice steady despite the swirl of emotions inside her. Their son ran toward her, his little feet pattering on the grass. "Mommy, look," he exclaimed, holding up the ball Abdul had given him. "Daddy taught me how to kick." Amina smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride for her son. She turned to Abdul, who was watching them with a look of tenderness in his eyes. "You're doing well with him," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Abdul's smile grew, though there was still a hint of uncertainty in his expression. "I want to be there for him. And for you, Amina. I know I've done a lot of damage, but I'm trying to be better." Amina nodded, her thoughts conflicted. There was a part of her that wanted to believe him, that wanted to see the man he was becoming and not the man who had betrayed her. But the scars were still there, and healing wasn't as simple as time passing. "You're trying, but it's not enough to just try," Amina said, her voice soft but firm. "Actions speak louder than words, Abdul. I need to see that you're committed, not just to me, but to yourself, to our son." Abdul's expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "I know, and I'm working on it. Every single day. But I understand if you're not ready to believe that yet." Amina looked at their son, who was happily kicking the ball back to Abdul. The love she felt for her child was undeniable, pure. She wanted him to grow up knowing both his parents, knowing that they were united in their commitment to his well-being. But could they get there? Could she allow herself to trust Abdul again? "I'm not sure what the future holds, Abdul," Amina said, taking a deep breath. "But for now, I think it's important that we focus on co-parenting. Let's take it one step at a time." Abdul nodded, his face a mix of understanding and hope. "That's all I ask for. Time. And the chance to prove that I can be the man you deserve." Amina and Abdul continued to share custody of their son, meeting regularly to discuss his needs, his milestones, and everything in between. It was a strange balance, a delicate dance of cooperation, and though it was often awkward, there was a quiet sense of peace in it. They were learning how to be parents together, despite the complicated history they shared. As the weeks passed, Amina noticed a subtle shift in their interactions. Abdul had stopped making excuses for his past actions, and though he had never expected forgiveness, he worked hard to show Amina that he was committed to being a better man. He wasn't perfect, he still made mistakes, but he was trying. And that, Amina thought, was all she could ask for. One afternoon, as they sat on a bench at the park watching their son play, Abdul spoke up again. "Amina, I know you're not ready for anything more than what we have right now. And I respect that. But I want you to know that no matter where we go from here, I'll always be there for you, for our son. I'm not going anywhere." Amina looked at him, her heart a little softer than before. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer defined by the man who had hurt her. She was stronger than that, and she would always do what was best for her son. "I appreciate that, Abdul," she said quietly. "And I believe you. But I also need you to understand something. My healing, my peace, isn't dependent on whether or not we get back together. I've learned to stand on my own. And that's where I need to be." Abdul took a deep breath and nodded, a small but genuine smile appearing on his face. "I get it, Amina. I really do. And I want you to have that peace. I just hope that one day, you'll see that I'm worthy of being part of your life again, if that's what you want." Amina nodded, her heart heavy with both love and uncertainty. She wasn't sure what the future held for them, but she was certain of one thing. She had taken control of her own destiny, and no matter what, she would continue to build a life that was true to her. A few months later, Amina and Abdul found themselves at a crossroads. Life had continued, as it always did, with its share of challenges and triumphs. Amina had come a long way in her personal growth, and her relationship with Abdul had evolved into something more respectful, though still distant. But every now and then, she found herself wondering about the possibility of healing, about whether there was space for Abdul in her life again. It wasn't an easy decision to make, but Amina had learned to trust her instincts, and her instincts told her that it wasn't about rushing into anything. It was about moving at a pace that felt right for her, and perhaps, just perhaps, there was room for reconciliation, but only if it was built on the foundation of mutual respect, trust, and love. Abdul had kept his promises. He had been there for their son. He had respected her boundaries. He had worked on himself, and Amina had begun to see the change. There was still a long road ahead, but the possibility of a future together, however uncertain, began to feel a little more within reach. For now, Amina was content to let things unfold naturally. She wasn't ready to rush into anything, but she no longer saw Abdul as the man who had betrayed her. She saw him as someone who, like her, was on a journey of healing. Amina stood in front of the mirror, taking a long, hard look at herself. Her reflection showed a woman who had been through immense pain but had emerged stronger, wiser, and more certain of her worth. She had learned that healing was a process, not a destination. It was messy, it was hard, but it was worth it. As she prepared for the next chapter of her life, whether that would involve Abdul, her son, or both, Amina was ready. She had rewritten the story of her life, taking back the pen from the hands of betrayal and pain. She was no longer a victim of her circumstances. She was the author of her own narrative. No matter what came next, Amina knew she had the strength to face it. She had built a life from the ashes of her past, and whatever the future held, she would embrace it with open arms. The weeks rolled by in a quiet blur for Amina. She continued to balance her life as a mother with her career, carving out a new space for herself that was independent of the past. Still, Abdul lingered in her thoughts, more often than she cared to admit. The years of betrayal weren't something easily erased, but she could no longer ignore the glimmers of hope that he might be changing. As time passed, Amina found herself analyzing her feelings, trying to separate the lingering affection from the fear of repeating the mistakes of the past. She had learned that forgiveness wasn't just about letting someone off the hook. It was about freeing herself. Yet, she also knew she couldn't do that if she kept second-guessing every step she took. One evening, as Amina and her son settled in for a quiet night at home, the phone rang. It was Abdul. She hadn't expected to hear from him. He had been respectful of her space recently. Her heart skipped a beat. The old, reflexive pain still clung to her, but she took a deep breath before answering. "Hello," she said, her voice cautious but calm. "Hi, Amina." Abdul's voice was warm, almost tentative. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything. I wanted to check in." Amina hesitated before responding. She hadn't expected this kind of call after everything. She had come to think that they had found a quiet peace between them, each moving in their own direction. "I'm doing fine," Amina said, trying to keep things neutral. "Everything's good. How about you?" "I'm okay," Abdul replied, though there was a tinge of vulnerability in his voice. "I've been thinking a lot about the conversation we had at the park. I know we're not rushing into anything, and I'm not asking for anything more than what we have now. But I just want you to know that I'm here, for you, for him. If you ever feel like talking, or if you need anything, I want to be there." Amina's mind raced. It wasn't just the words that caught her off guard, it was the sincerity behind them. She had spent so long closing herself off, building walls around the parts of her heart that had been broken. But Abdul's quiet persistence, his willingness to stay present, made her realize something she hadn't fully admitted to herself. She still cared. Not in the same way she had before, but there was something there. Something worth exploring. "Thank you, Abdul," she said, her voice softening. "I'm still figuring things out. But I appreciate your patience." "I'll give you all the time you need," he replied, his tone steady but filled with hope. "I just wanted you to know that I'm not going anywhere." Amina sat in silence for a moment after the call ended. The conversation had left her with more questions than answers, but also with a sense of peace she hadn't expected. She wasn't ready to make any big decisions, but she realized she was no longer running away from the possibility of forgiveness, perhaps not for reconciliation, but for her own peace of mind. As the months passed, Amina continued to focus on herself and her son, but the wall she had carefully constructed began to feel less like protection and more like a prison. She couldn't keep living in a state of constant emotional vigilance, watching Abdul from a distance without truly engaging. He had been nothing but respectful, had honored her space, and yet she had been afraid to acknowledge the complexity of her feelings. Abdul, on his part, had been unwavering in his commitment to change. He had attended therapy, taken part in support groups, and made it his mission to work on his personal flaws. It wasn't easy for him, but he knew it was the only way to show Amina that he was truly capable of being the man he had promised to be all those years ago. One afternoon, Amina invited Abdul over to spend some time with their son. She had been unsure at first, but the thought of seeing him interact with their child in a calm and loving way nudged at something deep within her. When Abdul arrived, he greeted her warmly but without expectation. He played with their son, and Amina watched as the bond between father and child deepened. It was clear that Abdul had grown in many ways, and she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. After they finished dinner, Amina found herself sitting with Abdul on the porch, their son asleep in the next room. "Thank you for today," Amina said quietly. "You seem different. I can see it. You've been making an effort." Abdul met her eyes, his expression serious. "I'm not perfect, Amina, but I am trying. I know I've lost your trust, and I have no right to expect it back right away. But I want you to know that I'm committed to being a better person, for you, for our son, for myself." Amina nodded slowly. "I can see that. I've seen you change. It's hard to ignore. But trust, Abdul, trust is something that's built. It takes time, patience. I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again, but I'm willing to take small steps." Abdul's eyes softened. "I don't expect you to rush into anything. But I'll wait, Amina. I'll wait as long as it takes. I just need you to know that I'm here." Amina felt a lump form in her throat. She had always known that healing wasn't linear, but it didn't make it any easier. Her heart was still scarred, still hesitant. But she also understood that growth wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. "You're not the man you used to be," Amina said softly. "But I'm not the woman I used to be either. We've both been through so much. And maybe, just maybe, there's a future where we can coexist in peace, for our son." Abdul reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "That's all I want, Amina. Peace. Whether that's as friends, co-parents, or something more, I just want us to be okay." Amina squeezed his hand, the warmth of the gesture calming her racing thoughts. It wasn't an answer, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, that's all you could hope for, a chance to rebuild, one small step at a time. Months turned into a year, and Amina and Abdul's co-parenting relationship continued to evolve. They had their ups and downs, moments of tension mixed with moments of understanding. Neither of them was in a rush to define what their future would look like. but they had found a way to navigate the complexities of their past while building a stable foundation for their son. One evening, as Amina sat with Abdul, discussing their son's upcoming school events, Abdul brought up a subject they had carefully avoided for months: his infidelity. "I know we haven't really talked about this," Abdul said cautiously, "but I need you to know that I am truly sorry. I want you to understand that it was never about you. It was about me. My inability to face myself, my own shortcomings." Amina looked at him, her face unreadable. She had heard the apology before, but hearing it now felt different. There was no defensiveness in his voice, no attempt to justify his actions. Only raw, unfiltered remorse. "I don't expect you to forgive me for everything," Abdul continued, his voice heavy with emotion. "But I want you to know that I am deeply sorry for the hurt I caused you. You didn't deserve it." Amina felt the weight of his words sink in, but instead of feeling anger, she felt tired. Tired of the past. Tired of the pain. She didn't know if she could ever forgive him completely, but for the first time, she realized she didn't need to. "I've carried that pain for so long," Amina said softly, "but I'm tired of letting it define me. I'm tired of letting it control my life. I can't keep living in that hurt." Abdul nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I never wanted to hurt you, Amina. And I promise, from this day forward, I will do everything in my power to be someone you can trust, whether as a co-parent, a friend, or whatever we choose to be." For the first time in a long time, Amina felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't ready to reconcile their past fully, but she was ready to let go of its hold on her. I think we're both in a better place than we were before," Amina said, her voice steady. "But that doesn't mean everything will be easy. It just means we're moving forward. Together. For him." Abdul smiled softly, his heart light with hope. For him. As the months passed, Amina and Abdul's relationship began to settle into a new rhythm. They no longer lived in the shadow of their past mistakes, but it wasn't without effort. They both understood that their lives, and especially their relationship, had been irrevocably changed. They had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about finding ways to coexist with it. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Abdul continued his work on himself, attending therapy and making strides toward becoming a better person. He often reached out to Amina, not to push for reconciliation, but to show her that his commitment was unwavering. His love for their son was clear, and Amina began to see the man he was trying to become, a man who could be trusted, not just with their child, but with her peace of mind. One evening, as they were sitting together after dinner, Abdul broke the silence. "Amina, I've been thinking a lot about the future," he said, his tone serious but gentle. "Not just for us, but for our son. I know we're not rushing into anything, but I want you to know that whatever happens, I'm here. I want to be the kind of father who shows up, always. For him, for you." Amina looked at him, her gaze softening. The wall she had built around her heart had started to crumble, piece by piece. She wasn't ready to make promises or declarations, but there was a new understanding between them. "I know you're here, Abdul," she said quietly, "and I appreciate that. But I also need you to understand that I'm doing this for me, too. I'm learning to stand on my own, to define myself outside of everything that happened between us. I've learned that I can be strong, even when it's hard." Abdul nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I get it, and I respect it. You don't owe me anything. But I hope, over time, you'll see that I'm not the same person I was. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I will wait for as long as it takes." The air between them was thick with unspoken feelings, feelings that neither was quite ready to name. Amina wasn't sure if reconciliation was possible, but for the first time, she didn't feel the need to make a decision right away. She had time. They both did. One day, about a year after their last deep conversation, Amina received an unexpected visit. It was from one of the women she had met during her pregnancy, Lola. They had kept in touch, sharing updates on their children and lives, but Amina hadn't heard from her in a while. Lola's voice was urgent when she called. "Amina, I need to talk to you. It's important. Can you meet me today?" Amina's curiosity piqued, and despite her busy schedule, she agreed to meet at a nearby cafe. When she arrived, Lola was sitting at a corner table, her face drawn with worry. Amina took a seat across from her, instinctively sensing that something was wrong. "Lola, What's going on? Amina asked, concern evident in her voice. Lola took a deep breath, then glanced around, ensuring no one was listening. It's about Abdul, she said in a low voice, looking at Amina for a reaction. Amina froze, her heart beating faster. What about him? Lola hesitated before speaking again. I know this is going to sound strange, but I need you to hear me out. I'm not trying to cause trouble, but I think you should know the truth. Abdul, he wasn't always honest about his past. About what happened with you. With all of us. Amina's brow furrowed in confusion. What are you talking about, Lola? Lola sighed, a look of regret crossing her face. You remember when we all went into labor at the same time? Well, after that, Abdul visited me. We talked about our pregnancies, our lives, and he admitted something to me. He told me that he'd been seeing multiple women while he was married to you. That he had been hiding things from you for a long time. Amina's chest tightened as Lola's words sank in. Why are you telling me this now? I wasn't going to say anything, Lola continued. But after everything that's happened, seeing how hard you've been trying to rebuild your life, I just felt you should know. He hasn't been completely honest with you. He's changed, yes, but the truth is he was living a double life. He never fully came clean about everything. And you deserve to know the whole story. Amina sat back in her chair, stunned. The weight of the revelation hit her like a wave. She had known Abdul had made mistakes, but hearing this, the extent of his lies, was a new kind of betrayal. The trust she had been so cautiously rebuilding felt like it had just been shattered again. Why are you telling me this now? Amina repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. Lola met her gaze. Because I can't stand the idea of you being kept in the dark, Amina. I know you're trying to move forward, but you deserve the truth. Even if it hurts. Amina's mind raced. She had been so careful, so patient with Abdul, allowing herself to believe that the man he was becoming could be the man she had once married. But now, it felt like everything was crashing down once more. I don't know what to say, Amina whispered, her thoughts spinning. I thought we were finally getting somewhere. Lola nodded sympathetically. I get it. I'm sorry, Amina. I really am. But I couldn't keep this from you any longer. The following days were filled with silence and uncertainty. Amina couldn't shake the conversation with Lola from her mind. She had trusted Abdul with her heart, with their son, and now she was questioning everything she had believed. The foundation of their rebuilding had been shaken, and Amina wasn't sure if she could trust Abdul anymore, no matter how much he had changed. That evening, as Amina sat in her living room, lost in thought, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Abdul. Can we talk? Amina stared at the screen for a long time. She had been avoiding him, unsure of how to confront what she had just learned. The words Lola had shared echoed in her mind. Abdul hadn't been completely honest with her. The weight of that truth made her hesitate. Should she confront him? Or should she let it go and move forward, as she had planned? She took a deep breath and responded. I think we need to talk. Now. Moments later, Abdul arrived at her door. His face was drawn, and there was a hint of worry in his eyes. Amina didn't greet him with the warmth she had once shown, but instead, she motioned for him to sit. Abdul, Amina began, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. I had a conversation today. With Lola. Abdul's face paled, and he shifted uneasily in his seat. Amina, I didn't want you to find out this way. What exactly did you tell her, Abdul? Amina's voice was calm, but there was a steel edge to it. I was trying to protect you, Abdul said, his words faltering. I didn't want to hurt you, but I wasn't being honest about everything. I've made so many mistakes, Amina. I was seeing other women, but none of it meant anything. It was all a mistake. I should have told you sooner. I should have been honest from the beginning. But I didn't know how to face you, to admit what I'd done. Amina's heart ached, but the pain was different now. It wasn't about shock or anger. It was about disappointment. She had hoped for so long that Abdul was truly changing. But now, she understood that he was still hiding parts of himself. I need time to process this, Abdul, Amina said softly, standing up. I don't know what to say. I need to think. Abdul stood, his expression pleading. I understand. I know I've hurt you again, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I want you to know, Amina, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, just give me a chance to prove to you that I can do better. Amina looked at him, her heart heavy. I don't know if I can trust you again. Not after this. You've broken my heart too many times. Abdul stood there in silence, regret written all over his face. Amina felt the weight of the moment pressed down on her. For the first time, she realized that her journey of healing wasn't just about rebuilding trust with Abdul. It was about learning to trust herself again. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she knew it was time to stop letting Abdul's choices define her own. Good night, Abdul, Amina said quietly, stepping away from him and closing the door behind her. Amina sat on the couch, staring out the window. The night was quiet, but inside her mind, everything was loud. She didn't know what the future held for her and Abdul, but she knew that whatever happened, she needed to stand strong. For herself, for her son, and for the life she had built so far. And as she looked at the stars outside her window, she realized something important. She had the power to define her own future. She didn't need anyone else to decide her worth. She had come too far to let her past dictate her happiness. Tomorrow was a new day, and Amina was ready to face it, on her own terms. Days turned into weeks, and though Amina still found herself wrestling with the emotional weight of everything Abdul had revealed, she knew she couldn't afford to remain stuck. Every conversation, every revelation had made it painfully clear that healing wasn't just about forgiving Abdul, it was about reclaiming herself. As time passed, Amina threw herself more fully into her work and her son's upbringing. Every day was an opportunity to prove to herself that she was enough, that her worth wasn't tied to anyone else's actions or apologies. Yet, Abdul's presence in her life wasn't something she could ignore. He had become a part of her, their shared history now etched into both their lives in ways neither could erase. The truth was, she hadn't completely let go of him, nor was she entirely ready to. It was a strange middle ground, no longer the woman who clung desperately to the idea of a perfect family, but not yet the woman who had completely freed herself from the past. Abdul, too, seemed to be struggling with their new reality. He still visited their son, they still spoke occasionally, but the easy camaraderie they once shared was gone. What they had now was fragile, tenuous. One evening, after tucking their son into bed, Amina found herself standing in the kitchen, gazing out the window at the dark sky. The doorbell rang, and she hesitated before walking toward the door. When she opened it, there stood Abdul, looking both weary and determined. I know this isn't easy, Amina, Abdul began, his voice low. And I know I've hurt you more than I can ever explain. But I can't keep pretending like everything is okay when it's not. I need to talk about everything, the lies, the mistakes. I need you to hear me, to understand that I'm truly sorry for everything I've done to you. Amina swallowed hard, a lump forming in her throat. She hadn't expected him to show up at her door like this, but here he was. The man who had broken her heart and made her question everything, standing in front of her with raw honesty. I can't promise anything, Abdul, she said quietly, her voice tight with emotion. I don't know where we go from here. I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again. I don't expect you to, Abdul replied, his tone sincere. But I want to try. For myself, for you, and for our son. I'll do whatever it takes to prove that I can be the man you need. But I also know I can't rush you. I'll wait, Amina. I'll wait as long as it takes, even if it means being patient for years. Amina stood there, taking in his words, feeling the weight of their past settle between them. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't continue living in the shadow of betrayal. It was time for both of them to face their truths, to own their mistakes and take responsibility for their actions. I'm not asking for an easy answer, Amina finally said, her voice shaky but resolute. But I need time. Time to figure out what I want. What's best for me? What's best for him? Abdul nodded slowly, his eyes filled with understanding. I know, and I won't rush you. I'll be here. Whenever you're ready. As the weeks turned into months, Amina's internal struggle continued. She found herself questioning the path forward. Could she truly let go of everything that had happened? Could she ever truly trust Abdul again? Or was she fooling herself by even considering reconciliation? Her friends, especially Lola and the other women she had befriended during her pregnancy, were supportive. but each had their own opinions on the matter. Lola believed in second chances, in the possibility of growth, while others warned her to protect herself, to move on and build a future independent of Abdul. But Amina wasn't sure she wanted to move on in the way they suggested. She didn't want to build walls around herself. She wanted to learn how to love again, even if it meant doing so cautiously, on her terms. She found herself meeting Abdul more frequently, not out of a desire for reconciliation, but out of necessity. They had to talk, especially when it came to their son's upbringing. Their conversations were still awkward, but there was a tenderness to them, an acknowledgement that they both were doing the best they could with the hand they had been dealt. Sometimes, their son would be with them, and in those moments, they would almost forget the complexity of their situation, focusing only on the joy of watching their child grow. One evening, as they sat across from one another, both of them exhausted from a long day, Abdul spoke quietly. "Amina, I know I've been asking for a lot of chances, a lot of time. And I know I don't deserve it. But I just want you to know that I'm committed to doing whatever it takes to make things right. Even if that means stepping back. Even if that means I'm never more than a co-parent to you. I just want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what." Amina looked at him, her heart heavy. She had hoped for this moment for so long, for Abdul to truly see her, to understand her pain, her needs. She wasn't sure where they were headed, but she wasn't alone anymore. She had fought through the darkest of days, and now she had the space to think clearly about what she wanted. "I know you've been trying, Abdul," she said softly, "and I appreciate it. But I need time. I need to find my own strength, to find my own voice outside of everything that happened between us. I'm not asking for a fairy tale. I'm asking for peace." Abdul nodded slowly, his face filled with both understanding and regret. "Take all the time you need. I just want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here, no matter what you decide." As the months continued to unfold, Amina's life began to take on a new shape. She found herself growing more and more confident in her ability to stand alone. Her career flourished, her bond with her son grew stronger, and she finally felt the courage to pursue her own dreams, separate from the shadow of her past with Abdul. She also began to take a hard look at her own identity, rediscovering the woman she had once been before everything had unraveled. It wasn't easy, but with each passing day, she felt a sense of power building within her. Power not defined by Abdul's actions or the pain of betrayal, but by her own strength and resilience. During this time, Abdul respected her space, and though he still visited their son, he no longer pressed her for a decision. He knew, deep down, that the only way forward was through patience, allowing Amina the time and space to heal on her own terms. It was a painful process for him, but he had come to understand that no amount of pleading could rush her. One evening, after a particularly long day, Amina sat alone in her living room, sipping tea and watching her son play. A sense of clarity washed over her. She wasn't healed, not completely, but she was getting there. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't need them. What she did know was this: she had control over her own life again. She smiled to herself. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the way she had envisioned it all those years ago. But it was real, and it was hers. She was learning, growing, and for the first time in a long time, she felt peace. Her journey wasn't over, and she still didn't know what the future held for her and Abdul. But she did know that no matter what happened, she was strong enough to face it. And that, she thought, was a good place to start. As Amina's life settled into a new rhythm, she found herself gradually letting go of the fear that had once controlled her every decision. She had come to realize that healing wasn't a destination, it was a journey, one that was uniquely hers. It was a path filled with hard moments and difficult decisions, but also with small victories that mattered most. Her bond with her son, Jamil, had deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated. She reveled in the joy of watching him grow, hearing his first words, and witnessing his curiosity about the world around him. Every milestone he reached was a reminder of how far she had come, and how much love she still had to give. One afternoon, as she and Jamil played in the garden, her phone rang. The caller ID flashed Abdul's name. Amina hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen. They had spoken only sporadically in the months since their last conversation. She had managed to maintain a cordial relationship with him, but nothing more. It was clear they both needed time apart to find clarity in their own lives. With a deep breath, she answered the call. "Hello. Hey, Amina," Abdul's voice came through, calm but slightly hesitant. I've been thinking a lot lately, and I wanted to ask if you'd be open to having a conversation. About everything. Amina paused, considering his words. The past few months had given her a sense of balance she hadn't felt before. The weight of their past had lessened, though it still lingered. She wasn't sure if she was ready to dive back into the complexity of their relationship, but she had grown. She could listen now without immediately reacting, without letting her emotions take control. I think we need to talk, she said, her voice steady. But I want to make it clear that I'm not ready to make any decisions yet. I need space. I need to understand what you're asking for. I understand, Abdul replied, his voice sincere. I don't expect anything from you. I just want to show you who I am now. I've spent months working on myself, Amina. I want you to see that. Whatever that means for us. I'm willing to hear you out, Amina said softly. Let's talk. They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe later that week. When Amina arrived, Abdul was already there, sitting at a corner table, his eyes flicking nervously to the door as if waiting for her arrival to bring some clarity. She took a deep breath and walked toward him. Hi, she said, offering a small smile as she took a seat across from him. Hi, Abdul replied, his tone warm but cautious. There was a palpable tension between them, but it wasn't hostile. It was simply the weight of all that had passed. They sat in silence for a moment, both unsure of where to begin. Finally, Abdul spoke. Amina, I've spent a lot of time reflecting on everything that's happened. The lies, the hurt, the betrayal. I've been trying to understand why I did the things I did, and it's been hard to face the truth. But I need you to know, from the bottom of my heart, that I am sorry. Not just for what I did, but for the pain I caused you. Amina listened quietly, her eyes focused on him. She had heard his apologies before, but this time felt different. There was no excuse, no justification in his words, only raw, unfiltered regret. I don't know if I can ever forget the past, Abdul, she said after a long pause. But I'm not asking you to change it. I just need to understand where we go from here. Abdul nodded, his eyes filled with sincerity. I know. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or even at all. But I want to be a better man, Amina. For you, for Jamil, for myself. And I'll do whatever it takes to show you that I'm committed to that change. Amina felt the weight of his words, but there was still a lingering uncertainty in her heart. She had seen Abdul's efforts, and while they were genuine, she knew that actions spoke louder than words. And right now, her own actions, her ability to stand on her own 2 feet, meant more to her than anything he could offer. I'm not ready to make any promises, Abdul, Amina said, her voice quiet but firm. I don't know what the future holds for us. I'm still figuring out what I want, what I need. But what I do know is that I need to prioritize my own healing. And that's something I need to do on my own. Abdul looked down, absorbing her words. I understand. And I respect that. Amina smiled faintly. Thank you for giving me the space I need. I'm still figuring it out, but I'm learning to trust myself again. In the weeks that followed, Amina focused more on herself and her son. She took time to explore new hobbies, invest in her career, and reconnect with friends she had neglected over the years. She felt stronger, more independent, and more sure of who she was, without Abdul, without the expectations of anyone else. She spent more time reflecting on the lessons she had learned. She had learned to trust her instincts, to stand firm in her boundaries, and to prioritize her well-being. She had learned that love wasn't about accepting mistreatment, but about finding a balance between self-love and loving others. And most importantly, she had learned that her happiness wasn't tied to anyone else's choices but her own. Jamil continued to grow, and Amina was there for every milestone. His first steps, his first words, the days when his laughter filled their home with joy. Though she was still uncertain about her relationship with Abdul, she knew that the love she had for her son was enough to keep her grounded. One evening, after tucking Jamil into bed, Amina sat by the window, watching the sunset. She thought of Abdul, of the man he used to be, and the man he was trying to become. She didn't know if she could ever love him the same way again, but she realized that wasn't the point. What mattered now was whether she could forgive him, not for him, but for herself. And even if they never found their way back to each other, Amina was learning to forgive him, one small step at a time. Months later, Abdul reached out again. This time, it wasn't a plea for reconciliation. It was a simple message. How's Jamil? I wanted to make sure he's doing well. I'd like to visit him sometime soon, if that's okay with you. Amina didn't hesitate. She responded, asking if he'd like to meet at the park to spend time with Jamil. There was no rush, no pressure, just a father wanting to see his son. And Amina, for the first time in a long while, didn't feel resentful. She simply felt at peace. When they met at the park, Abdul's eyes lit up when he saw Jamil running toward him with his little arms outstretched. Amina watched them interact from a distance, her heart swelling with something she couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was a combination of hope, acceptance, and maybe even forgiveness. "Thank you for this, Amina," Abdul said later, after Jamil had run off to play with some other children. "It means a lot to me. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't undo, but I'll always be grateful for the chance to be in his life." Amina smiled softly, watching the bond between father and son grow before her eyes. "I'm glad you're here for him, Abdul. And I hope you continue to show up for him. That's all that matters." As they sat together, Amina realized something crucial. Healing wasn't linear. It wasn't about a straight path from hurt to happiness. It was about the small, quiet moments where the healing could begin anew. She didn't know what the future held, or whether she and Abdul would ever rebuild the trust they had once shared. But for now, she was content with where they stood, as co-parents, as individuals on their own journeys, and as two people learning to respect each other once again. And for Amina, that was enough. Amina continued to embrace her newfound peace, feeling more in control of her life than ever before. She spent her days focused on Jamil, her career, and her personal growth. There were still difficult days, but they were becoming less frequent. What used to feel like an insurmountable weight had gradually shifted into something more manageable, a lesson in resilience, a reminder that she could handle whatever life threw her way. One afternoon, as Amina sat in her favorite cafe working on a project, she received a message from Abdul. It wasn't a long text, just a simple note saying, "Can we talk?" Amina's first instinct was to ignore it. She had been doing so well, focusing on herself and creating a life outside of Abdul and their past. But something within her hesitated. They had shared so much, and despite everything, she still cared for him. Not in the way she once had, but in a more mature, compassionate sense. After a moment of consideration, she decided to reply. "What's on your mind?" Abdul's response came quickly. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About forgiveness. I don't expect anything from you, Amina. But I wanted to tell you that I've been working on myself. I'm in therapy now. I'm trying to become a better version of myself. I want to be a better father to Jamil. And I hope, one day, maybe we can find a way to be friends again." Amina read his message carefully. There was sincerity in his words, a commitment she hadn't heard from him before. "I'm glad you're getting help, Abdul," she typed back. "I don't know where things will go between us, but I appreciate the effort. I think it's important for Jamil's sake that we keep moving forward in a healthy way." Abdul's reply was simple, but it left her with a sense of peace. "Thank you for understanding. I'll keep working. Whenever you're ready to talk more, I'll be here." As Amina set her phone down, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The conversation had been calm, without the emotional roller coaster it could have been. It was a step forward, no grand declarations, no promises of reconciliation. Just two people, trying to do right by themselves and by their son. As time passed, Amina began to realize just how important boundaries were in her life. She had spent years allowing her emotions to be swayed by Abdul's actions, by the ups and downs of their marriage. But now, she had learned the importance of defining what she was willing to accept and what she wasn't. It wasn't just about Abdul, it was about all aspects of her life. She realized how much she had given up of herself in order to keep peace, to avoid conflict. She had neglected her own needs in the pursuit of pleasing others. But now, with her son in mind, she vowed to never lose sight of who she was again. Abdul's progress in therapy was encouraging, but it wasn't a solution to their past. It was a start, and she could appreciate that. But she was no longer the woman who would simply accept things as they were. She had built a life that was hers, and she was determined to protect it. One evening, as they met in the park to exchange custody of Jamil, Abdul spoke up. "Amina, I know I've made mistakes. I've hurt you in ways I can't take back. But I want you to know that I'm trying. I'm not asking for anything, but I just need you to know that I'm here. For Jamil, for you, in whatever way you need." Amina paused, watching Jamil play nearby. She could see the sincerity in Abdul's eyes, but she also knew that his progress was just that, progress. There was still work to be done, on both their parts. "Abdul," she said softly, "I appreciate what you're saying. And I know you're trying. But I've realized that I can't let myself go back to the way things were. I've learned that I need to put myself first. Not in a selfish way, but in a way that ensures I can be the best mother, the best version of myself. I don't know what that means for us, but I do know that I have to stay true to who I am now." Abdul nodded, the weight of her words settling between them. "I understand. And I respect that. I won't push you. I just want you to know that I'm committed to being better, for all of us." As they parted ways that day, Amina felt a sense of closure. Not the final kind of closure that meant they had all the answers, but a kind that meant they were both on the right path, toward healing, toward understanding, and toward being the people they needed to be, both individually and as parents. Several months later, Amina received an unexpected invitation. Abdul had invited her to a small gathering at his place to celebrate Jamil's 5th birthday. At first, Amina hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was ready for a situation where they would have to navigate old wounds. But after talking to Lola, who encouraged her to embrace the opportunity for closure, she decided to attend. The party was small, with just a few close friends and family members. Amina arrived with Jamil, who was excited to see his father, and immediately felt the shift in the atmosphere. Abdul had decorated the house with balloons and streamers, creating an environment full of love and warmth for their son. For the first time in a long while, Amina felt a sense of peace about the situation. Throughout the party, she and Abdul exchanged a few words here and there, but the tension that had once defined their interactions was no longer there. It wasn't easy, there were still moments of awkwardness, but it was clear that they had both moved forward in a way that allowed them to coexist without the weight of resentment between them. As the day came to a close, Abdul pulled Amina aside. "Thank you for being here," he said quietly. "I know things aren't perfect, and I don't expect them to be. But I appreciate you showing up for Jamil." Amina smiled softly. "He's our son, Abdul. No matter what, we both want the best for him." They stood there for a moment, the weight of their past no longer hanging over them, the future uncertain but filled with possibilities. Amina had learned to set boundaries, to trust herself, and to embrace forgiveness, not for Abdul, but for her own peace. And in that moment, she realized that healing was not just about time, it was about the choices they made each day. She wasn't sure what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready for whatever the future held. Amina's life continued to unfold in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her relationship with Abdul was still evolving, but it no longer consumed her thoughts. She had come to accept that the past could not be undone, and that the future was something they both had to build slowly, piece by piece. One evening, as she sat in her living room, Jamil's laughter echoing from the next room, Amina realized something profound. She had found her strength not in the absence of pain, but in how she had learned to live with it. She had learned to live for herself, to embrace her own dreams, and to build a life where her son could thrive. And that, she thought, was all that truly mattered. Amina had come a long way in her journey. The days of constant uncertainty had given way to an understanding of herself that she hadn't had before. She had learned to navigate the complexities of co-parenting, of balancing her own growth with the needs of Jamil, and of fostering a peaceful environment that allowed her to heal. Her relationship with Abdul, though still fragile, was evolving into something new. It wasn't the passionate love they once had, nor was it the angry, resentful partnership they had been forced into. Instead, it was a space of mutual respect, understanding, and commitment to their shared responsibility for their son. They had both grown, each in their own way, and were slowly beginning to understand that the best way forward wasn't to erase the past, but to embrace it and learn from it. One afternoon, as she walked through the park with Jamil, Amina was struck by a deep sense of peace. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the path, and the crisp air filled her lungs with a sense of renewal. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly at ease in her own life. Jamil tugged at her hand, pointing excitedly toward a group of children playing soccer. Amina smiled, her heart swelling with pride as she watched her son's enthusiasm. "Do you want to join them?" she asked, her voice warm. Jamil nodded eagerly, and they walked toward the group of children. As she watched him interact with the other kids, Amina couldn't help but feel a quiet gratitude for the life they had built. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. She had learned that true strength wasn't about fighting every battle, but about knowing when to let go and when to hold on. She pulled out her phone and sent a quick message to Abdul. "Jamil is thriving. Thank you for being there for him. I can see the difference in him every day." The response came soon after. "Thank you, Amina. I'll keep showing up for him. Always." Amina placed the phone back in her pocket and returned her attention to Jamil, who was laughing as he ran after a soccer ball. In that moment, Amina realized that her own healing was no longer tied to any resolution with Abdul. It was tied to her ability to embrace the love she had for her son and to live a life that was full, not in spite of the challenges she had faced, but because of them. Months passed, and life for Amina, Jamil, and Abdul continued to unfold in unexpected ways. They had come to a place where their relationship was stable but undefined, neither a romantic reconciliation nor a distant, cold co-parenting arrangement. It was a unique balance, one that took effort but no longer felt impossible. Amina had continued to pursue her dreams, enrolling in a part-time degree program that had always been an aspiration of hers. She had learned that her own success wasn't just about being a mother, but about nurturing her own ambitions and passions. It was something she had neglected for too long, but now, she was determined to make it a priority. Abdul, too, had continued with his therapy and had made strides in becoming a more present father. He was learning what it meant to be truly accountable for his actions, not just to Amina, but to himself as well. While their conversations remained cautious, there was a quiet understanding between them, a recognition that they were both trying, each in their own way, to be better. One afternoon, as Amina and Jamil sat on the couch reading a book together, Amina received a call from Abdul. This time, the conversation felt different. There was no tension, no hesitance. "Hey, Amina," Abdul said, his voice steady. "I've been thinking about the future and about how we're raising Jamil. I know we've been through a lot, and I don't expect us to be perfect. But I just want you to know that I'm here. For him, and for you, in whatever way I can." Amina felt a wave of emotion wash over her, not from the words themselves, but from the recognition that they had reached a place of mutual understanding. It wasn't a perfect place, but it was enough. "I appreciate that, Abdul," Amina said, her voice soft. "I think we've come a long way, and I'm glad we're doing this together, for Jamil." They spoke for a few more minutes, their words no longer laden with the pain of the past. Instead, there was a quiet hopefulness, a belief that their journey, though difficult, was far from over. As Amina hung up the phone, she looked at Jamil, who was still engrossed in his book. She felt a deep sense of pride in him. He was the product of their love, their struggles, and their growth. And no matter what happened next, Amina knew that she had done her best for him. She had found her own strength in the midst of chaos, and in that strength, she had created a foundation of love and stability for her son. No matter what the future held, Amina was ready to face it with open arms, stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. And as she watched the sunset that evening, she felt a quiet peace settle in her heart. The road ahead was unknown, but Amina was no longer afraid. She had learned that life wasn't about having all the answers. It was about trusting that each step forward would bring her closer to the life she was meant to live. With a heart full of gratitude, Amina smiled and whispered softly to herself, "I'm ready."